Well, that's the other point about this society, basically, is that everything that people use for a reference of what is, right and wrong, what's desirable, who's good, who's bad, who's worth it, who's not worth it, everything people use to define that, to define themselves, is an illusion that was invented and presented to them. And so, if a person doesn't know themselves because everything they use to define who they are is based upon these presentations, these false gifts, if you will, then that person is a mind slave from the start. But then it comes down to, say all this is leading up to some mass event, like I was saying, would you survive if all of a sudden they went to the max and just went crazy and wanted to do all these tricks out in the open, and they stopped basically hiding and they stopped doing it for a 1,000-year plan, but they just did it all at once? Would a person survive? Exactly. Instead of a 1,000-year plan of introducing this stuff, of feeding off of people's emotions, lust, hate, fear, confusion, all that stuff, and it was all, maybe they realized they ran out of time. Say somebody pulled the plug and it was like, this experiment, this game, whatever it is, has to end. It's over. And they know they have like a day left to do all this they wanted to do. And so then they do it to the max. They change events up, put people in people's lives, they put trickery everywhere. And, a person who was falling for that, it's going to rip their mind in half, into pieces. They're not going to know what's going on. But then again, like I was saying, if you have this idea, in a way, kind of projection hologram of your mind inside, and that's your motivation, your knowledge, yourself, and they can only do, sleight of hand, trickery, deception, illusion to convince you to change that idea, desire, motivation of the self within, but they can never actually go within and forcibly change it. One has to agree in the illusion, one has to accept the illusion in order for them to have power over them. Then they actually can't do anything. It's all basically people giving them their power by putting those illusions above their self-worth and the original knowledge. Basically, it's worship. It's worshiping the materialism, the illusion of the self, and the pleasures of the material world above the truth of the self and the knowledge. And it's basically temporary existence over what, is termed eternal existence. And you gotta think, if, eternity comes down to awareness, consciousness is related to temporary existence and the body and everything of this world. And, whether eternity exists or not, it comes down to the source of awareness. If awareness is literally the pure essence of being able to know that you exist, then how could that ever be taken away? You could say, well, you know hell, or you get buried in the ground or something. But the whole point is, what does that feel like? What is the experience of that if there's no awareness? Well, there's no such thing, because awareness is the experience of that. So there's no such thing as not awareness, or unawareness. It doesn't exist. You can't have it. But if we're aware now, imagine if you are aware at one point, then imagine, say there's a break, where there's no awareness. What happens? Well, no one experiences the not awareness, the unawareness. It's just like a quick blip from one place to the other. So the only thing one can imagine is that there's awareness, then not awareness, and you're not aware of that because it doesn't exist. It doesn't feel like anything, And then there's awareness again. Like when you sleep and you feel like there's a dreamless sleep, although there are always dreams, it's just that your awareness doesn't access all the memories sometimes. Then that's the interplay between consciousness, the conscious mind, what we know and talk about and can access in waking reality, and what we have access to in the totality of our mind, which goes beyond waking reality, what we can access with our awareness, basically what you can be aware of, but not know how to explain, not know how to use words and explain to somebody else, or basically be conscious of, be cognitive of. You are aware of a whole ton of stuff, but you're only able to speak about stuff that they give us words to describe, and we all collectively agree exists. That's the whole point. You can be aware of how you feel about somebody, or a situation, or stuff that's going on, but not really have a word of like why and how that's happening. And so then the idea is, if there's a way to go have awareness and then not have awareness, the idea is, imagine if people are in existence in the universe and then they're not in existence, and everything in the universe continues and recreates itself in different ways, then wouldn't there be a possibility that existence would occur again at some point in time, randomly, somewhere, somehow? Maybe not randomly, but just because. And so then if there's no creation aspect, if we're in a big void that farts out molecules, which more or less, this is the whole workaround for the creation concept. If we're in we're in a universe that it just happens. It's all basically accidental. And there's no real reason in terms of specifically making it happen. It's basically randomized and accidental. Well, it's not that yet, because that's an entanglement of your perception of what's important. And so, because, that's our consciousness, or what am I saying? If our knowledge on this level, our awareness is unable to comprehend the reason, then the reason why stuff happens, it means nothing to us. Or it's just incomprehensible. And so regardless of that, if we're in a kind of void space, basically the regular scientific explanation. It's a big empty cold void, stuff just floats around and randomly combines itself, and eventually life forms. And it goes on for either ever, for virtually infinite, billions of light years across. So if that's the case, then if we're based upon stardust, basically the elements, carbon, hydrogen, and all that, basically normal stuff, because it's abundant in the universe, then is it not likely that, regardless of what happens here, somewhere else, the same type of life situation will randomly come about? And if the answer is no, because there's, it would take billions of years, well, time is basically all we have. So that means it's basically an assurity that the same thing is going to happen again, somewhere, some way, somehow. So now imagine if it expands and contracts more or less infinitely to the point where the same things play out. And it's not the same things, but that the same cycle of just random occurrences play out over and over again. Then we can extrapolate that no matter how much time is in between each one, eventually it'll come around again. And it'll be a person with your name and a civilization just like this. And there will be, a bunch of differences. But eventually, given enough time, there will be one exactly the same as this with one minor difference. With little differences, because if it was the same exact one, then it would be this one. That's not going to happen. It's not going to replay. So eventually, with that view, given enough energy and enough time, you come up with the view, or the outcome, that this is just one of multiple versions of the same, play of history happening over and over again in slightly different variations each time. And so the idea then, if that's true, then what that means is the point where we're no longer conscious because we're relying on conscious biological, existence, meaning the brain and the body, that we really don't have an experience for that, at least not consciously. There might be some awareness there depending on how this operates. And that's the term that basically, okay, well, there's no awareness, if you will, or no consciousness once that's over. But in a certain amount of time, like a dream, it's going to pop back up again. And it's going to seem instantly like that the other one ended and the next one began. There will be no break between it, at least from our awareness. Now imagine that the awareness that exists in between each one is literally, say, the soul or something like that, traveling from each universe to the other one where the next time rung is played out. If the universe expands and all this happens and then it contracts again and basically goes down into a point, right, where everything is one molecule again or one atom, and then it all blows back up again and the same possibilities all happen and it all starts over again, in a way that's two different spaces. It's the same space, but it's like two different times. Yeah, so there's like hyperspace. If you map out, for instance, on a grid or something like that, a timeline, like you're editing a movie or something like I edit, you'd have each explosion, in each universe, and they're overlaid, but if you splay them out that way, they're different, right? Because your editing software is spreading it all out, you see. So what is the difference? Well, then that's not a difference of space, it's a difference of space over space. It's like hyperspace at that point. It's overlay space. So then what if then that awareness in between each existence is the soul traveling from one space to the next, or basically going into an in-between plane like the editing software where it's no longer on the screen, but it's in the background kind of getting processed, like digitally rendered in the next universe over. And that would be like, we wouldn't be able to describe it consciously, because it would be like us turning into a light form in the computer system and getting put in a file, server system, and then waiting until it gets retranslated out after the next universe renders, the next movie scene renders, and then the guy puts us back into that scene. It wouldn't be, explicable through conscious means. Now imagine the conscious self, the one that's here, because we have all these illusions, all these temporary desires, and we have ways of entangling our awareness with this realm, although this realm is just the first, it's the face value of what's going on. It's not the actual underlying code, the program of the movie, if you will. It's just one part of the script of one guy. For instance, if it happens over and over again with one minor detail change, then what's the idea that's actually happening? If it continues to happen in repetitive manner with one detail change, it's the notions that don't ever change, and that's what's actually happening. You have a puppet show, and all the puppets change, but there's an underlying theme about what you're presenting to the people. It's like all, I don't know, animals or something. Okay, that's an animal-based puppet show or something. That's the theme. So if you have a life experience and every little detail changed of every time and place and motivation and desire, but the same lesson, the same problems come back about that you have to learn, you have to overcome, that's the theme, and that's your soul's lesson. That's what you're overcoming by doing this over and over again. Or it's just a trap. Regardless, I think it's a trap if we don't learn, and I think it makes a person a god, an empowered being, if they do learn. And all they do is overcome it to the point where this world contains the entanglement of these illusions, but it inevitably goes away to the point where if we entangle our awareness with the body and we believe we are all those desires, temptations, illusions, basically all those things that these higher beings can use against us to milk us for emotional energy and bioetheric energy, then we become their slave. We become a character in their game, in their movie, and no more. At least not from our perspective. We might be more, but we won't know it, because it's all about what you know, what you can prove. We know that in the world. It doesn't matter what these guys do. It's about what you can prove that they did. Ain't nobody gonna care otherwise. So if you know a certain thing, but you can't prove it because you never demonstrated it, you never put the seed in your life and allowed that to flourish and grow, if it was just a fleeting thought and it never became something, it never came to fruition, you didn't nourish it and water it and act on it and demonstrate it, then when you come from the other perspective, it's not gonna look like anything. It's like you were talking trash and you never really meant it. So it's the same thing, but from your soul to you. If you sit there and like, I'm about this, I'm about that, but you get entangled with all this BS and you come from the other layer, the other side in between the universes, and you say, this is this interdimensional mother effer planting all these tricks for me and I took the bait the whole time. You're gonna know you weren't talking nothing. You were just making it all up. So you have to actually act on it, and the whole point of acting on it is if you are in the body and you identify as the awareness that exists in between those planes of existence instead of the one that's only present here. And if you're present elsewhere, then how you interact here has to change. It has to have a different format than a person who is only able to react to stimuli, basically the brain and the sensations and the perceptual system. And basically it would be to stimuli and more or less the tricks, the illusions, the tricks, the identity that's temporary. You would have the ability to observe without reacting. To be something, more or less it's like this. You'd have the ability to be beyond what I said before, those definitions that are based upon all these material things, that are based upon all these outlines that other people who run society created for us. Because then, if people change that, which you can't change what's inside you, but you can change all this crap out here, then the person's fallible, they're unsteady, their personality isn't founded upon the truth. And so, but in that way, a big hurdle is that people see that as death. The ego sees it as death. The ego sees the truth as death. The soul as, the soul becoming the forefront of awareness as dying. Because the ego is the temporary, and the soul is what's eternal. So you tell people in this world, your clothes, your money, what you do for a living, how people think of you, what you think about, entertainment, and what you enjoy in the materialistic versions of stuff, all that's an illusion. It's all fake. It was all invented 10 days ago by some guy who lives in an alternate dimension that wants to milk you for your energy. They'll sit there and be like, you're crazy. And if you convince them and say, well, you have to give it all up today, you'll be like, they'll be like, I'm gonna die. This isn't real. It can't be happening. This is the end of my world. It's because the ego identifies with the illusion, because that's all it can do, because it doesn't have access to that in-between world. So the idea is that if you can convince your ego to let go of that stuff, that's when your soul has come into the body, because only the soul has access to the other world beyond this one. That's the whole point. So it's an interplay where if you can uplift the consciousness, and it's faith, but that's a bad word, because I can sit here and be like, have faith in whatever stuff and donate $5 and you will be, set later on. And so faith means BS because of so many people abusing that and lying to people. But in other words, faith, but you have faith that small voice of power and truth within you that can't be influenced by other beings and illusions is the truth. Have faith in that, nobody can take that as a lie. And at that point, never give nobody money, never believe anybody else because they're telling you to believe in them, in their story. That's what you have faith in. But in doing that, that's a leap of faith where you then make a choice that's the you that you're going to act upon, that's the you that you're going to identify with, and you become eternal. Because the action actions, the waves, the influences that you leave in life, that you know, like a wake in a boat, that they expand out across, you know, out of your mind, basically in time, like on the screen, each universe splayed out, but it's in the same spot. Where the difference is, it's hyperspace. So the moves you make in hyperspace, because the choices you make in each universe are slightly different, yet if you splay them out on a screen, they're in the same space but separated through time. In that way, if you're existing in the observation of you as the soul, okay, those waves, they never stop. They only bounce off of stuff and reinforce change. The waves of, I'm going to listen to this person or this show or this, I'm basically worshiping idols and materialism and bullshit, that never goes anywhere. All it does is get sucked up into these interdimensional worlds where these beings use it as fuel, because it's energy that goes towards them. Because what we give our energy to, what we think upon, expands. So in other words, all that can do is take away our energy and take away the power from the original version of ourselves, and it actually gives it to these other beings. And when we give the power back to ourselves, all it can do is more or less eternalize us. Because nobody can take that away. If you came and you told the whole world, you know, that shit's bullshit, I believe in me, I believe in this, in a world of illusion, well, how many people, you know, see that and are shocked and changed forever? Think of the greats that have basically been taken out in various forms, who, you know, whether it was about slavery, or the corruption in the system, or, you know, music and stuff like that, and changed the world because everybody's like, you can't do that, and they did it anyway. You can't make up a system where you do that. You have to actually make it for yourself. You can't make, you know, a system where it's like, okay, I'm going to set up laws and rules, and then you come in and do what, you know, the right thing that you want to do. There's no system like that. There's only systems that say you can't do shit, and then you have to take it upon yourself to overcome that, and that is eternal. You get it? It can't be faked. It can't be made up. It can't be an accident, in other words, what I'm trying to say. If everything in the universe accidentally happened, that is not an accident. That's the only thing that's not an accident. That's the act of true creation, because it comes from the self, and it can only come from the self. It's not a universe that's dark and expands and is cold. It's actually a mind bubble of some larger being. So it's not even, we don't even have to wait for each universe to go one after the other and stuff like that. That's literally just an idea behind it. In reality, it's all closely knit right together. You know, instead of being splayed out on that monitor, it's happening all right in front of our face. You don't need to split it up. Exactly. Your mind is the program, the software, and you can alter it as any way you want.
She was like, she would shit to the kids, you feel me? Like the offenses. And that's just, and it's like, you saying that is, you feel me? What makes you hungry is what, you feel me? Is the becoming you, and it's like, she was able to still come back at the end of the movie. Like, she was dead, her body was dead, but she was still standing next to the other lady.
The main concept of that is that they figured out a way of it attaining immortality. It carried side effects where they desired blood, or they had basically animal desires. And he was describing a movie. I'm recording this. He was describing a movie, and then that the girl died or something like that. They were trying to bury her, but something happened where they could witness
her still moving.
Right, and it's because they could see basically into the other plane, but because they were according to universal law at that point, they were according to, you know, the rules, if you will, they were technically dead too.
Yeah.
Even if they were kind of interacting in this plane. And so my explanation was that you have the universe, and then the next universe, and down below you have the soul that bounces across, and maybe the underworld, whatever you want to call it, and that exists, and that is capable of transferring through that space. But the consciousness, the biological awareness, the personality, the physical identity, the I of the conscious individual, the waking self, that can't traverse between the universes in that in-between place, because ultimately side effects occur if one does. But that there is the problem, the outline of the situation. Not the problem was a problem too, but the idea that there are workarounds, cheat codes, if you will, to bounce that consciousness forcefully between the universes, and when that happens, that I, that personality, that waking self, is therefore immortal, which is like breaking of rules. But my explanation was when the self, that personality, goes across the universe to universe and doesn't have to go through that underworld cycle that the soul is capable of traversing without, mutating, if you will, what happens is the desires, any energies present in that organization, the structure, if you will, the construct of the consciousness, the mind, basically, the waking mind, is amplified many thousands, maybe millions fold, because anything traveling through that space becomes magnified, because imagine it's technically, just like the people were technically dead, well, technically the energy traveling through that space is magnified a million billion times because it takes a million billion years. How long is it from one end of eternity to the other? It's infinite. There's no way to describe it. So anything that's in that area, say it's a shape, a geometry or something like that, and it's imbalanced, that imbalance becomes more and more and more drawn out. So if a person goes through that, and there are natural methods for this, if a person goes through this and they're using more or less a cheat code, a version that's imbalanced because it's based upon desire and personal desire, then that desire is what magnifies 1,000 million billion times, and they end up with a vampire consciousness that needs to feed on innocent life in order to sustain itself and remain what it is. And that's, in the way the parachute, the hot air balloon that is an expanded consciousness version of itself here, it has all these holes in it because it's expanding towards infinity. So what they have to do is suck in more hot air in order to retain that balance, and there's no other source other than people themselves. You can't just go sit around in life, and you get the natural high of being alive, not after you're a million years old and your consciousness has jumped from one universe to the next, to the next, to the next. Because the idea is once you begin, then there's no end. It happened forever, because that's how long eternity is. As soon as you do it one time, you've done it forever. You get it? And then you get the idea that there are two types of beings. Beings that do that and beings that don't do that. You get the organic, normal humans, and then you get these fallen angel, beyond the veil beings who more or less control because they really have no other choice, or they'll dissolve with the amount of power. And it's because the power, the orientation taken into that process, that expanse, is what will expand a billion times. And so if a person is doing it for selfish reasons, then they become extremely, if they're hungry for power, well, then they become hungry for power times a million. Now, the idea is if a person does it, or if they just follow on a path where everything is organized towards the highest level of harmony, compassion, creativity, truth, self-awareness, basically balance, and in other words, one has the ultimate power, yet they use that to help others, okay, instead of feeding themselves, what they become is somebody with the abundance of God, basically. The abundance of infinite power, and that's the other end of the occurrence. One degrades and takes, and one gives, ultimately, and expands on that. But it's all based upon whether a person goes into it with the idea that they're doing it, it's the intentions, the reason. They're doing it to give for themselves, to attain and to only have, or to basically, more or less balance themselves out, and then it happens automatically and they become an immortal or eternal being because their consciousness, like I said in the earlier part of the talk, their consciousness balanced out, synchronized with the power, the awareness of the self-awareness, the soul, okay, not the biological consciousness but the soul, and through that the consciousness tosses away the entanglement to the physical world, the desires, all that stuff. That if you expand that, all it does is make a very, very hungry soul. It's called an angry ghost, and the person becomes immortal through that, through the soul becoming one with the body, if you will, or more so the consciousness. So there's two paths, and those are the two races on Earth right now. We're all immortal, but one took the one route and one took the other route. And it's a really weird situation we're going on. And you can see it all taking place, because all that's happening, well, one ends up there in a different way than the other. It's like this. If you have a soul path, and you go through that, and your soul merges with basically the self of the body, okay, or the consciousness, and basically the temporary consciousness merges with the eternal awareness, okay, and it's done for the good of all through harmony and balance, not taking, but slowly balancing all the energies. The idea is if all the energies are organized and harmonized in that body, in that person, and it goes across that universal barrier, okay, when it expands, you're just going to get the same thing, but more powerful. If they're imbalanced, you're going to get not the same thing, you're going to get something that's basically mutated, like a monster or something. And so imagine then you have the soul group that goes across and they become eternal, they become gods, or one with God, however you want to look at it. They make it to heaven or something. And you have that group there, and then you have the group that became monsters first. Would there not be a difference? Even if they're both in the same place in the end? One mutates to get there, and one more or less becomes more and more refined and more purified to get there. And so that's the part of the difference between what has become a technological pathway to ascension or immortality, where those supercomputer systems can beam a person's consciousness consciousness across that universal barrier. But because it's not balanced, all these problems arise. And then there's the organic, what's called the organic pathway, where one more or less rides on the soul. The consciousness rides on the soul because the consciousness becomes unified, synchronized with the soul. And the way to describe that is if you become eventually the creator of all things, right? And your consciousness now is what traverses to the other side. Imagine if your consciousness now lived in respect to you, not being the creator of all things, but being a body that's hungry and has desires and wants certain things that it can never really attain because they're all physical, they're all just pleasure-based, BS. It's temporary stuff. So when you become that eternal creator and you have the power to do anything, what would you feel, what would you think and recognize in looking back to you as the conscious being who always chased desires and wanted other stuff and looked at material, temporary things as the goal? You would say, I don't recognize that person as myself. That's just like I must have been crazy or something. That's not the true me. So that's the idea. If you live how you are here, in respect to knowing that all this is a test, basically, it's a dream, and you already have access to everything, then when you become that higher form, you look back and you identify as that. And the whole point is that means that the you are now and here gets to stay, if you will, there. And it doesn't mean anybody dies or doesn't, make it. It just means that when you look back, you go, that was a costume. That was more of a little novelty gag I was doing for a little bit. It doesn't mean and you experience, I'm dying and I'm not me anymore. You just look back and go, oh, I'm much better than that. I'm much greater than that. I don't have all these desires and needs and all that. That's an illusion. But the point is, so that's not bad. It doesn't hurt. You know what I'm saying? But the point is, if you look back and you go, yeah, that's me, you get the rewards of that. It's not like it doesn't hurt or it's not cool enough. You actually, the consciousness that you are now feels and knows and feels the power of being the creator. And that means that what you want here and what you do and what you feel and who you are gets to expand and experience that power of getting to do anything. Because all you want to do then, just like all you want to do here, is expand and experience that power and create. It's all about creating. And so there's multiple pathways leading to the same outcome. However, some exchange identity, if you will, wholeness for power. And that's the difference. We either take the long route and we don't have instant access to power, or we take the instant power route, but we lose ourselves. We lose our wholeness. The idea is if you take who you are, imagine you take your consciousness in a supercomputer system that knows everything there is to know in existence of the universe and beyond. And you instantly go click and you know everything. What is going to happen to you? Who you are. Could you even go have the same conversation with people you had yesterday? You couldn't do anything the same. You would be gone. So then you have this aggregation where you slowly build up to knowing everything, to having the power of everything, to basically being able to do everything, and that's the soul that has a blueprint where all this is planned out, or you do it faster than you can integrate those aspects in order to, or integrate them in a way that keeps that geometric shape of the soul or consciousness in a proportional, balanced, harmonized outline. If it's balanced, harmonized, it grows up and becomes the same type of thing. And so that's the whole situation with the world today, because power is being released, knowledge is being released, technology is being released, and it's being done in a way that's overloading people's capacity to handle the technology, the addictions, the drugs, whatever it is. And not so much drugs, but it's literally what this is all about is technology, because those vampires are technological vampires. That's the whole point. It's technology that does it, that offers that power. And that's what happened, though, since this society, since this civilization began to go off kilter, since things began to change in ways that, haven't been recognized ever in history before.